The Sterling Hotel's grand ballroom didn't just sparkle, it breathed luxury. Every surface gleamed under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen constellations from the ceiling. The air smelled faintly of gardenias and expensive cologne, mingling with the crisp scent of chilled champagne. Waiters moved like ghosts in tuxedos, balancing trays of tiny canapes and flutes of bubbly with practiced ease. Laughter floated through the room, light, polished, the kind that never cracks or stumbles. This was the Black Diamond Charity Gala, the kind of event where people didn't just donate money, they donated impressions. And tonight everyone was dressed to leave one. At the heart of it all stood the man who'd turned the evening into a spectacle, Julian Thorne. He wasn't just rich. He was the kind of rich that made headlines without trying. In his early 40s, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that always seemed to be calculating something, he'd built a tech empire from a dorm room coding project into a global force. People called him visionary, ruthless, brilliant, sometimes all three in the same sentence. But tonight he wasn't here to talk about algorithms or quarterly earnings. He was here to unveil his latest obsession, the Aria Grande. It sat on a raised platform near the center of the room like a throne made of polished ebony. Sleek, modern, almost alien in its design, the Aria Grande wasn't just a piano. It was a machine that listened, built with biometric sensors woven into the keys and pedals. It could read a player's heartbeat, breathing pattern, even subtle shifts in emotional state. Using real-time AI, it would then compose an original piece of music based entirely on what it sensed. No two performances would ever be the same. It was, Julian claimed, the first instrument that truly understands the human soul. He stood beside it now, microphone in hand, grinning like a magician about to pull off the impossible. The crowd quieted, sensing a moment. "Friends," he began, voice smooth and warm, "we've all heard the saying, music is the universal language. But what if that language could speak back? What if your joy, your sorrow, your quiet hope could become a song no one's ever heard before?" He paused, letting the idea sink in. "That's the Aria Grande, and to prove it works, not just as a tech demo but as real art, I'm making a challenge." A murmur rippled through the room. Challenges from Julian were never small. They were viral, bold, often absurd, but always unforgettable. "Here's the deal," he said, stepping closer to the piano. "Anyone in this room, yes, anyone can come up here tonight, sit at the aria and play something original. No sheet music, no rehearsals. Just you, the keys, and whatever's in your heart. If the system confirms the piece is 100% original, technically flawless, and emotionally compelling, you win $1 million. He let that hang in the air for a beat. Then, with a playful glint in his eye, he added, "And I'll marry you." The room erupted. Laughter burst out like fireworks, bright, loud, and full of disbelief. A woman in a shimmering silver gown clutched her pearls and fanned herself dramatically. "Oh, Julian, don't make promises you can't keep," someone called from the back. Another guest raised a glass. "I volunteer my dog." "He howls beautifully." Julian laughed along, raising his hands in mock surrender. All right, it's a joke. Mostly, but the $1 million? That's dead serious." He knew the odds were laughably against anyone succeeding. The aria wasn't just listening, it was judging. Its AI had been trained on centuries of musical theory, every genre from Baroque to bebop, and could detect even the faintest echo of a borrowed melody. It measured finger pressure, timing, harmonic choices, emotional authenticity. To create something truly new in the moment with no preparation, nearly impossible, especially for a room full of CEOs, socialites, and influencers who hadn't touched a piano since childhood recitals. This wasn't really a contest. It was theater, and Julian was the star. Cameras clicked, phones recorded. Within minutes, clips of his challenge were flooding social media. "Billionaire offers hand in marriage for piano genius." Read one headline. Comments poured in. "I'll learn Chopin by tomorrow." "My toddler banged on a keyboard once, does that count?" Plot twist. The janitor wins. Most treated it as pure entertainment, a rich man's whimsy, harmless and flashy. But not everyone saw it that way. Downstairs, far from the glitter and clinking glasses, in a narrow service corridor behind the kitchen, a man in a worn blue uniform paused mid-stroke with his mop. The ballroom's muffled sounds drifted through a slightly open door. The laughter, the music, Julian's voice echoing faintly. He'd been assigned to clean the Sterling tonight as part of his regular contract work for Thorne Tower. the gleaming skyscraper Julian owned downtown. He usually worked alone, arriving before dawn or staying long after midnight, invisible to the world above. He wasn't supposed to be listening, but he couldn't help it. When he heard the words, "Play something original," his chest tightened. Not with excitement, but with memory. Deep old memory, like dust stirred from a forgotten shelf, 25 years ago. He'd sat in a university lab in Boston, fingers dancing over prototype keys not so different from the aria grande. Back then, he wasn't cleaning floors. He was studying music cognition, how the brain processes melody, how emotion shapes sound. He'd been part of a small research team, testing early versions of responsive instruments, and he'd played. Not just well, extraordinarily. Critics had called his touch uncanny, his improvisations like listening to someone's dreams. He'd performed in intimate halls, recorded demos that never got released, dreamed of composing for film, for theater, for the world, but life had other plans. His family needed him back home urgently. A sudden crisis, a cross-country move, then years of working odd jobs to keep food on the table. Music became a secret, something he did only when no one was watching. Late at night, in empty practice rooms at community centers or school buildings he'd clean, he'd sit at a piano and let his hands remember what his heart never forgot. Never for an audience. Never for money. Just to stay sane. Now, standing in the dim hallway with a bucket of soapy water at his feet, he watched through the cracked door as guests posed beside the aria grande, pretending to play with exaggerated flair. The piano responded with polite, generic flourishes. Pleasant, but empty. No one was really trying. Why would they? It was a billionaire's party trick. But then he thought of his daughter. She was only 19, bright-eyed and full of plans, until the diagnosis came. A rare autoimmune condition, slow-moving but relentless. The treatments were experimental, expensive, and mostly not covered by insurance. He'd sold his car, then his old upright piano, the one his grandfather had given him, just to keep up with co-pays. Every night he came home bone-tired, hoping she'd had a good day, that the pain hadn't kept her awake. The $1 million, it wasn't just a number. It was hope. Real, tangible hope. He looked down at his hands. They were rough from years of scrubbing, hauling, wiping, but beneath the calluses the muscle memory remained. He could still feel the weight of a key under his fingertip. The exact pressure needed for a soft legato. The split-second timing of a syncopated rhythm. And that piano upstairs? He understood its language. Maybe better than Julian himself. He didn't move toward the ballroom. Not yet. But something had shifted inside him, a door creaking open after decades of rust. Upstairs, the party surged on. A famous actress tried her hand at the aria, giggling as it produced a jazzy little tune. "See, I'm basically Mozart," she declared to cheers. Julian clapped politely, but his eyes scanned the room, already thinking about the press release he'd send out tomorrow. Tech Titan proves AI can't be fooled, or something like that. He felt confident, safe. This was his world, controlled, curated, predictable. But down the hall, the man with the mop pushed his cart toward the freight elevator. As the doors closed, he caught his reflection in the metal surface. Tired eyes, thinning hair, uniform stained with the day's work. And yet for the first time in years, there was a spark in his gaze. Not arrogance, not desperation, just quiet certainty. He remembered a piece he'd started years ago. A melody that came to him during a rainstorm in Havana, before everything changed. It had no name, no ending. Just a question in minor key, waiting for an answer. Maybe tonight he'd finally give it one. He didn't know it yet, but by sunrise, Julian Thorne's easy laugh would be the last sound of his old life. And the man in the blue uniform would step into a light he'd spent decades avoiding, not for fame, not for fortune, but because sometimes the thing you love most is the only thing that can save the person you love more. The elevator hummed as it descended. Outside, the city pulsed with noise and neon. But inside that small metal box, there was only silence and the faint, steady rhythm of a heart preparing to play. The city never really sleeps. But by 3 a.m, even New York slows down to a whisper. Streetlights cast long shadows over empty sidewalks. Delivery trucks rumble past like tired giants. And in a small, dimly lit apartment on the edge of Queens, a man sat at a kitchen table covered in medical bills, his fingers tracing the edges of a crumpled hospital statement like it might reveal a secret if he looked long enough. He'd been home for less than an hour after finishing his shift at the Sterling. His back ached, his feet throbbed, and his uniform still smelled faintly of floor wax and bleach. But he hadn't gone to bed. Not yet, because on the counter beside the sink, his phone kept lighting up with notifications. News alerts, social media posts, even a message from a former coworker he hadn't heard from in years. "Did you see this? Sounds like something you'd be good at." He hadn't told anyone about his past. Not his neighbors, not the other night staff. Certainly not his daughter. To them, he was just the quiet man who always showed up on time, fixed the broken coffee machine without being asked, and never complained, even when the building super dumped extra trash bags outside his cart by accident. He liked it that way. Being invisible meant he didn't have to explain why a man who once played for packed recital halls now scrubbed bathroom tiles for a living. But now, Julian Thorne's challenge was everywhere. And it wouldn't leave him alone. He picked up his phone again and watched the clip. Julian standing beside that sleek black piano, smiling like he owned the air around him, tossing out $1 million and a marriage proposal like party favors. The man sighed. It was ridiculous, and yet, the Aria Grand wasn't just some gimmick. He recognized the tech. Years ago, before everything fell apart, he'd consulted on an early version of that very system, back when it was just lines of code and a dream in a basement lab. He knew how it listened, how it interpreted silence as much as sound, how it could tell if your joy was real or just performed. And he knew, deep in his bones, that he could speak its language. But could he do it in front of a room full of strangers? Cameras? Julian Thorne himself watching with that amused, skeptical look. He glanced toward the bedroom down the hall. The door was cracked open, just enough to see the soft glow of a nightlight inside. His daughter was asleep, if she was sleeping at all. Some nights the pain kept her up for hours. She never complained, not really. Just smiled through it, told him she was fine, asked about his day like she wasn't the one hooked up to IVs and monitors half the week. She'd always loved music. When she was little, she'd sit cross-legged on the floor while he played, eyes wide like she was watching magic happen. Now, the only piano in their lives was a cheap keyboard app on her tablet, something she used to distract herself during long hospital stays. He'd promised her a real one someday. When things get better, he'd say. But better kept slipping further away. He stood up slowly, joints popping, and walked to the window. Outside, the city blinked in the dark. Thousands of lives moving in parallel, none of them knowing what the others carried. He thought about the challenge again. The $1 million wasn't just money. It was freedom. It was treatment without begging. It was sleep without dread. It was watching his daughter laugh without wincing. But what if he failed? What if he walked up there, sat down, and his hands froze? Or worse, what if the piano read his fear and produced something hollow, mechanical, fake? He'd be laughed out of the room. Humiliated. Another punchline in Julian Thorne's glittering world. He turned away from the window and opened a drawer in the old dresser by the couch. Inside, beneath folded work gloves and spare batteries, lay a single sheet of yellowed paper. It was a photocopy of a concert program from 1998. His name was listed third from the top, solo piano, original composition. Below it, a review snippet, a voice both tender and fierce, music that lingers long after the last note. He hadn't looked at it in over a decade. His fingers trembled slightly as he smoothed the paper on the table, not from age, from memory, from the weight of all the years he'd spent pretending that part of him didn't exist. He didn't need to practice, not really. His hands hadn't forgotten, but his heart needed reminding. The next night after his shift ended at Thorne Tower, he didn't go straight home. Instead, he took the service elevator down to sub-level 2, the old music wing, long abandoned after the company moved its arts outreach program downtown. The doors creaked open to darkness. He flicked on his flashlight. Dust floated in the beam like tiny stars. Rows of empty chairs. A grand piano under a faded velvet cover in the corner. He walked over, heart pounding like he was doing something wrong. Maybe he was. This space wasn't supposed to be used anymore. But no one came down here. No one would know. He pulled off the cover. The piano was old, a Steinway from the 70s, but well-maintained. Probably kept as a tax write-off or a nostalgic relic. He sat on the bench, the wood cool through his uniform pants. Took a breath. then placed his hands on the keys. At first, nothing came. Just silence and the hum of distant machinery. Then slowly a phrase emerged, soft, questioning. The melody from Havana, the one he'd never finished. It spilled out like water finding its path, weaving through minor sevenths and unexpected pauses, carrying the ache of exile, the warmth of memory, the stubborn hope that kept him going even on the hardest days. He played for an hour. No audience, no judgment, just him and the piano, talking in a language only they understood. When he finally stopped, his shirt was damp with sweat, but his mind was clear for the first time in years. He knew what he had to do. The next morning, he went online from the library, didn't want to risk using his home Wi-Fi in case someone tracked it back. He found the official challenge page on Thorn Innovation's website. There was a form to submit an entry, name, contact info, brief statement of intent. Most fields were optional. He typed carefully, using a burner email he'd created years ago for job applications. Under statement, he wrote only, "I'd like to try." No explanation. No backstory. Just those 3 words. He hit submit before he could change his mind. Days passed. The gala footage kept circulating. Talk shows joked about it. Late-night hosts did skits with inflatable pianos. No serious applicants came forward, just pranksters and performance artists who played nonsense and walked away laughing. Julian gave an interview saying, "Honestly, I'm surprised no one's taken it seriously. Maybe real genius is rarer than we think." The words stung, but they also lit a quiet fire. Then, on a rainy Tuesday, an email arrived. "Thank you for your submission. You have been selected to perform at the ARIA Grand Challenge Showcase this Saturday at 8 p.m., Sterling Hotel Grand Ballroom. Please arrive by 7:15 for verification and setup." His hands went cold. He read it 3 times, then printed it, folded it, and tucked it into his wallet like a sacred note. He told his daughter he had an extra shift that weekend. She didn't question it, she was used to his odd hours. But that night, as he packed a clean shirt and his old dress shoes, polished to a shine with toothpaste because he couldn't afford shoe polish, he caught her watching him from the doorway. "You seem different," she said softly. He smiled. "Just tired." She stepped closer, her steps careful like she was measuring each one. "You used to play, didn't you?" He froze. "What makes you say that?" She shrugged, leaning against the doorframe. "Sometimes when you think I'm asleep, I hear you humming. It's always the same tune, sad but strong." He didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "Maybe I'll play it for you someday. When I get it right." She smiled, the real kind, the one that reached her eyes. "I'll hold you to that." Saturday came too fast. He took the subway early, wearing his best slacks and the clean shirt, his janitor's uniform folded neatly in a duffel bag. He didn't want anyone to see him arrive in work clothes, not yet. At the hotel, he went through a side entrance used by staff, heart hammering as he showed his employee ID to security. They waved him through without a second glance. To them, he was just another worker, invisible as always. Backstage, things were chaotic. Tech crews adjusting lights, PR people shouting into headsets, Julian holding court with investors near the green room. No one noticed the man in plain clothes sitting quietly on a folding chair in the corner, eyes closed, breathing slowly. Then his name was called, not by the name he'd submitted, but by a number. "Contestant 7, please proceed to verification." He stood, walked forward, handed over his ID. A technician scanned his palms, checked his pulse, ran a quick biometric profile to ensure he hadn't rehearsed with the ARIA system before. "All clear." "You're up after the comedian," the stage manager said, barely looking up from his clipboard. "Try not to trip on the cables," he nodded. Didn't smile, didn't speak. From the wings, he watched the comedian take the stage, a loud, confident guy in a sequined jacket who banged on the keys like he was punishing them. The aria responded with a circus-like tune full of honks and slides. The crowd roared with laughter. Julian clapped politely, already checking his watch. Then it was his turn. The stage manager gestured. "Go ahead." He stepped into the light. Gasps rippled through the room. Whispers followed. "Is that the janitor? What's he doing up there? This has to be a joke." Julian turned, eyebrows raised, a smirk already forming. He leaned toward his assistant and said something that made her giggle. Clearly, this was the punchline he'd been waiting for. The man ignored them all. He walked to the piano, sat down, adjusted the bench, placed his hands over the keys. Silence fell. Not the polite kind, but the heavy, waiting kind. Like the whole room was holding its breath. He closed his eyes and began to play. The moment his fingers touched the keys, the room changed. Not because of noise, there wasn't any at first, but because of the sudden deep quiet that followed. It was the kind of silence that only happens when something real cuts through the noise of everyday life. 1 second, people were whispering, chuckling, glancing at their phones. The next, every eye was locked on the man in the simple shirt and worn slacks sitting at the piano, his back straight, his hands hovering like they knew a secret the rest of the world had forgotten. He didn't rush. He let the silence breathe. Then softly, a single note rang out. Clear, warm, like the first drop of rain after a long drought. Another followed, then another, weaving into a melody that felt both ancient and brand new. It wasn't flashy. No thunderous chords or dizzying runs. Just truth, played slowly, carefully, like someone telling a story they'd carried for years but never had the courage to speak aloud. The aria grande responded instantly. Its internal sensors, designed to detect everything from pulse rate to micro tremors in the fingers, lit up with data. But more than that, it listened. And what it heard wasn't just technique. It heard longing. It heard memory. It heard love wrapped in sorrow, hope stitched through pain. The piano began to shape the music in real time, adding subtle harmonies that echoed his emotion, deepening the resonance of each phrase, never overpowering, only supporting. Like a friend leaning in when you finally start to talk about the hard things. People stopped fidgeting. Phones lowered. Even Julian, who had been half-turned toward a guest with a glass of champagne in hand, slowly turned back. His smirk faded. His glass hovered mid-air. He didn't move. The music unfolded like a letter being read aloud. It started in a minor key, gentle, questioning, like a man walking alone through a city at dawn, remembering a home he'd left behind. Then almost imperceptibly it shifted. A brighter chord slipped in like sunlight breaking through clouds. The rhythm grew steadier, more certain. It wasn't happy, not exactly, but it was strong, resilient, like someone who'd been knocked down too many times but kept getting back up. Not because they wanted to, but because someone they loved needed them to. From the back of the room, a woman wiped her eyes without realizing she was doing it. A man in a tuxedo loosened his tie, as if the music had made the air too thick to breathe normally. Even the string quartet in the corner had stopped playing, their bows resting on silent strings, just listening. Julian stood frozen. This wasn't part of the script. This wasn't a stunt, a prank, or a performance. This was something else, something he couldn't name, but felt in his chest like a weight and a lift at the same time. He'd built the aria to prove machines could understand human emotion, but right now, it felt like the machine was showing him something about himself, something he'd spent years ignoring. How long had it been since he'd done something just because it mattered? Not because it would look good online or boost stock prices. On stage, the man played on. His fingers moved with a calm precision that came not from practice in the last few days, but from decades of quiet devotion. Every note had a purpose. Every pause held meaning. He wasn't showing off. He was sharing. And the aria, in its strange digital way, was honoring that. Then came the climax, not loud but deep. A cascade of chords that rose like a prayer, then settled into a single sustained note that seemed to hang in the air long after his finger left the key. He lifted his hands, let the sound fade completely, sat still. For 3 full seconds no one moved, no one breathed. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, one person clapped. That was all it took. The room erupted, not in polite applause, but in something raw and real. People stood. Some were crying. Others just stared, stunned, like they'd witnessed a miracle. Cameras flashed, but this time it wasn't for gossip. It was because they needed proof it had really happened. Julian didn't clap. He just walked toward the stage, slowly, like he was afraid the moment would vanish if he moved too fast. He stopped at the edge, looking up at the man still seated at the piano. You... Julian's voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat. You're serious? The man nodded once. Didn't smile. Didn't gloat. Just met Julian's gaze with quiet eyes that held no anger, no demand. Only the calm of someone who'd just done what he needed to do. A technician rushed over with a tablet. Sir, the aria's analysis is complete. He handed it to Julian with trembling hands. Julian scanned the screen. Originality, 100%. Technical execution, flawless. Emotional authenticity, exceptional. Top 0.1% of all recorded sessions. Below that, a note from the AI's core algorithm. This performance contains no known musical references. It is a unique emotional signature. Julian looked up, stunned. You've never played this before? Never, the man said simply. It just came. Someone in the crowd shouted, What's your name? He hesitated. Then softly, It doesn't matter. But it did. Within minutes, someone recognized him. That's the night janitor from Thorn Tower. And the story exploded. Not just online, but in real life. Reporters pushed toward the stage. Guests crowded around, asking questions, offering hands to shake. But the man didn't stay. He stood, gave a small bow, not to the crowd but to the piano, and walked off stage the same way he'd come, quietly, without fanfare. Julian followed him into the wings. Wait, he called out, voice urgent now. You can't just leave, you won. The $1 million, I know, the man said, stopping but not turning. But I didn't come for that. Then why? Julian asked, genuinely confused. Why risk it? Why show up like this? The man finally turned. His face was tired, but his eyes were clear. Because my daughter needs help. And I knew. I knew I could speak to that piano in a way no one else could. Not because I'm special, but because I've lived enough to have something real to say. Julian was silent for a long moment. All his clever words, his polished speeches, his billion-dollar confidence, they felt hollow now. This man had walked into a room full of power and privilege wearing yesterday's shirt, and changed everything with 10 minutes of music. You're right, Julian said quietly. I made a joke, but you treated it like a promise, the man nodded. Music doesn't lie. Back in the ballroom, the party had stopped. No one was drinking. No one was laughing. People stood in small groups, talking in low voices, some still wiping tears. The Aria Grande sat silent on its platform, no longer a tech demo, but something sacred, a witness. Later that night, as the crowd slowly dispersed, Julian stood alone beside the piano. He ran a hand over its smooth surface, thinking. He'd built it to prove machines could understand humans, but tonight, a human had used it to remind everyone, including him, what it meant to be human. Meanwhile, miles away in a quiet apartment in Queens, a young woman lay in bed, scrolling through her phone. A friend had sent her a link. OMG, is this your dad? She clicked it, heart pounding. The video loaded. There he was, her quiet, hard-working father, sitting at a grand piano in a fancy hotel, playing music so beautiful it made strangers cry. She watched it 3 times. Then she called him. He answered on the first ring. Hey, he said, voice tired but calm. Dad. Her voice broke. Was that you? A pause. Then softly. Yeah. You never told me you could do that. I didn't think it mattered anymore. It matters, she whispered. It matters so much. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, I played the song. The one I never finished, I think it's done now. She smiled through tears. Play it for me tomorrow? I will. Back at the hotel, Julian sat in his penthouse suite, the city lights stretching out below him like a sea of stars. He opened his laptop and typed a single command into his company's internal system. Initiate full medical coverage approval, urgent. Patient, daughter of contestant 7, all treatments, no limits. Then he leaned back, staring at the ceiling, the echo of that music still playing in his mind, not as data, not as code, but as a voice. A real one. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a billionaire. He just felt like a person, humbled, changed, and strangely hopeful. The janitor had come to win a prize, but what he'd really given everyone was a reminder that genius doesn't wear a suit. It wears whatever it needs to survive. And sometimes, it's been cleaning your floors all along. The morning after the gala, the city woke up to a story no one saw coming. News vans lined the block outside the Sterling Hotel. Social media buzzed with clips of the quiet man in the plain shirt playing the piano like it was an extension of his soul. Headlines called him the Phantom of Thorn Tower, the janitor who stunned a billionaire, and The man who turned silence into song. But in a small apartment in Queens, none of that mattered yet. All that mattered was the soft knock on the bedroom door and the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen. He hadn't slept much. Too many thoughts, too much adrenaline still humming under his skin. But when his daughter opened her door, eyes wide and phone clutched in her hand, he knew sleep didn't matter anymore. She ran to him, carefully because moving too fast still hurt, and hugged him tight. "You were amazing," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Everyone's talking about you." He held her gently, afraid to squeeze too hard. "I just played," he said. "That's all." "But you spoke," she said, pulling back to look at him. "I heard you, Dad, I really heard you." He didn't know what to say to that. So he just nodded, throat tight, and went to make breakfast. By noon, his phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, talent agents, talk show producers. Even a record label executive left a voicemail saying, "We don't care about your past. We care about your future. Call us." He ignored them all. He wasn't interested in fame. He'd done what he set out to do. Prove he could speak through music again, and maybe, just maybe, open a door for his daughter's treatment. What he didn't expect was a knock on his actual front door. He opened it to find Julian Thorne standing there, not in a tuxedo or a designer suit, but in dark jeans and a simple sweater, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. No bodyguards, no assistants, just him. "I didn't know your address," Julian said, slightly awkward, "so I asked building security. Hope that's okay." The man hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in." The apartment was small, 2 rooms, a kitchenette, a bathroom with a leaky faucet, but clean, warm, lived in. Photos of his daughter through the years lined the walls. A single bookshelf held medical journals, old sheet music, and a framed picture of a younger version of himself at a piano, eyes bright with possibility. Julian set the coffees on the table. "I brought Cuban roast, figured you might like it." A small nod. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, a bus rumbled past. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried. Normal sounds. "Real life," finally Julian spoke. "I owe you an apology." The man looked up. "For what?" "For treating your gift like a joke. For turning something sacred into a party trick." Julian ran a hand through his hair. "I built that piano to prove machines could understand people. But last night, you showed me that people understand machines better when they've lived enough to have something real to say." The man sipped his coffee. It was good, strong, sweet, just how he liked it. "I didn't do it for you," he said quietly. "I did it for her." He nodded toward the bedroom where his daughter was resting. "I know," Julian said. "And I've already taken care of her medical coverage. Full treatment. No denials. No waiting. Whatever she needs, it's approved." The man's eyes widened. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," Julian interrupted. "Not as payment. Not as charity, as respect." Silence again. But this time it wasn't heavy. It was thoughtful. Julian looked around the apartment, really looked. At the worn couch, the second-hand lamp, the stack of unpaid bills still on the counter. "You've been carrying all this alone," he said. Not as a question, but as a realization. "Most people do," the man replied. Julian leaned forward. "Let me help you carry it. Not just with money. With your music. People need to hear this. Not just last night's piece, everything you've held on to all these years." The man shook his head. "I'm not a performer. I never was, really. I just play." "There's a difference," Julian said. "Performers want an audience. Artists speak because they have to. You're the second kind." He didn't answer right away. "Then, what do you have in mind?" Julian pulled out his phone, not to show off, but to share. "I'm starting a new foundation. Thorne Arts Initiative. It'll fund music programs in schools and community centers that lost their arts budgets. We'll provide instruments, teachers, space, everything. But I don't want it to be another corporate vanity project. I want it to be real, and I want you to help build it." The man frowned. "Me? I'm a janitor." "You're a musician who chose to serve others when life got hard," Julian said firmly. "That's not less than being on a stage. In some ways, it's more." He thought about it. Really thought. Not about fame, not about money, but about the kids in his old neighborhood who'd never touched a real piano. The ones who hummed melodies in the hallway because they had no place to practice. The ones who gave up because no one told them their voice mattered. "What would I do?" he asked. "Guide us," Julian said. help design the programs, choose the teachers, maybe even teach a class or two, and record your music, not for charts or streams, for history, for the people who need to hear that beauty can come from struggle. The man looked toward his daughter's room again. She was sitting up now, watching them through the cracked door, eyes full of hope, not for herself but for him. He turned back to Julian. Only if you promise something, anything, that this isn't about you looking good, that it's really about the kids, that you'll listen when they speak, even if they don't use words. Julian met his gaze. I promise. They shook hands. Not as billionaire and janitor, not as winner and challenger, but as two men who'd just found something rare, trust. Over the next few weeks, things moved quickly but quietly. No press conferences, no flashy announcements, just meetings in coffee shops, late-night calls, and shared plans scribbled on napkins. Julian used his resources, but the man used his wisdom. He insisted the first community music center open in the Bronx, near the school he'd once attended. He helped find teachers who cared more about connection than credentials. He even donated his old keyboard app idea, now upgraded, to be used in hospitals for kids undergoing treatment. His daughter started her new therapy. Within days, she had more energy. Within weeks, she was walking without pain most mornings. She began joining him at the community center, not as a patient, but as a volunteer, helping younger kids with rhythm exercises, her laughter filling rooms that had been empty for years. One evening, Julian came by the center after a board meeting. He found the man sitting at a donated upright piano, teaching a group of teenagers how to improvise. Not with scales or theory, but with feeling. Play what you're holding inside, he told them. Even if it's messy, especially if it's messy. Julian watched from the doorway unnoticed. He saw a girl with braces and tired eyes play a hesitant melody that slowly grew bolder. He saw a boy who barely spoke in class light up when he found a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. He saw the man nod, smile softly, and say, "Now you're talking." Later, as they walked out together, Julian said, "You know, I used to think success was about building something no one else could. Now I think it's about helping others build what they thought was impossible." The man smiled. "Music taught me that a long time ago. I just forgot for a while." Back at his penthouse, Julian didn't throw another gala. Instead, he cleared a wall in his living room and hung a single photo, the one from the man's apartment, the younger version at the piano. Not as decoration, as a reminder. And in Queens, the man finally unpacked a box he'd kept in the closet for 20 years. Inside were old recordings, handwritten scores, concert programs. He didn't throw them away. He brought them to the community center and pinned them to a bulletin board titled, "Where Music Begins." One afternoon, his daughter found him there, staring at the board. "You're not going back to cleaning floors, are you?" she asked gently. He turned to her. "I'll always clean up when things get messy," he said. "But now, I get to help build something clean, too." She hugged him. "I'm proud of you, Dad. I'm proud of us," he whispered. Julian kept his word. The Thorn Arts Initiative opened 12 centers in its first year. Everyone had a piano. Everyone had a story. And in each somewhere you could hear the echo of a quiet man who once played for no one and changed everything by finally playing for someone. The marriage joke was long forgotten, but what grew in its place was something far more lasting. Partnership built not on wealth or status, but on the simple, powerful belief that everyone has a song worth hearing, if only someone gives them the chance to play it. 1 year after the night that changed everything, Carnegie Hall wasn't just filled with the usual crowd of critics, donors, and well-dressed patrons. It hummed with something quieter, deeper. The air smelled of old wood, fresh flowers, and anticipation. Backstage, a man in a simple black suit adjusted his cuffs, not out of nervousness, but out of habit. His hands, once rough from scrubbing floors, were now steady, calm, familiar with the weight of expectation, but not ruled by it. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not really. A year ago, he'd been invisible. Just another face in the service corridors of a building that bore someone else's name. Now his name was on the marquee, not in lights, not in bold print, but there. An evening with the music of resilience. No fancy title, no gimmicks. Just music. In the front row, Julian sat alone, no entourage, no phone in hand. He wore a dark suit, but his tie was slightly crooked, the kind of detail only someone who'd stopped caring about perfection would allow. He held a program, but he wasn't reading it. He was watching the stage, waiting. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the hall. Not the polite silence of obligation, but the deep collective breath of people ready to listen. Then he walked out. No grand entrance. No bow. Just a slow walk to the piano, a nod to the audience, and a seat at the bench. He placed his hands on the keys, took a breath, and began. The first notes were soft, familiar to those who'd seen the gala footage, but richer now, layered with everything that had happened since. It was the same melody from Havana, the one he'd never finished. But tonight it had an ending. Not a triumphant one, not a sad one, just a true one. Like a story that finally found its last sentence. As he played, images flashed in the minds of those listening. A child practicing in an empty school after hours. A father holding his daughter's hand in a hospital room. A billionaire learning to listen for the first time. A room full of teenagers discovering their voices through keys and strings. This wasn't just a concert. It was a testament. Halfway through the piece, the door at the back of the hall opened quietly. A young woman in a wheelchair rolled in, her face glowing under the dim exit light. She wore a simple dress and a smile that reached her eyes. She didn't draw attention to herself. She just listened. And when the music swelled into its final movement, warm, steady, full of quiet joy, she closed her eyes and let a single tear fall. Backstage after the performance, there were no champagne toasts, no flashing cameras, just a few close friends, a couple of students from the community centers, and Julian, who waited until everyone else had left before stepping forward. "You finished it," Julian said softly. The man nodded. Turns out it needed a year to find its ending. They stood in silence for a moment, the echoes of applause still ringing faintly through the walls. "You know," Julian said, "people keep asking me about that night at the gala. They want to know if I really meant the marriage thing. If I regret saying it." The man looked at him curious. Julian smiled, a real one, not the polished grin from before. "I tell them, best joke I ever made. Because it led me to him." The man chuckled. "You didn't lead anywhere. You just finally looked. And that was the truth." Julian hadn't discovered him. He'd been there all along, playing in silence, serving in shadows, loving without fanfare. All Julian had done was stop long enough to see. Over the past year, the Thorn Arts Initiative had grown beyond anyone's expectations. 12 community music centers now operated across the city, each one buzzing with life. In the Bronx, kids who once spent afternoons wandering empty lots now gathered after school to learn guitar, drums, piano. In Brooklyn, a former warehouse had been turned into a recording studio where teenagers produced their own songs. About loss, hope, identity, joy. In Queens, the center hosted weekly open heart sessions, where anyone, homeless, elderly, recovering, celebrating, could sit at a piano and play whatever they needed to say. The man didn't run it all. He didn't want to. But he showed up. Every week. Sometimes to teach, sometimes just to listen. He'd sit in the back of a beginner's class, eyes closed, smiling as a 6-year-old hit their first C major chord. He'd stay late to tune pianos, not because he had to, but because he remembered what it felt like to play on an instrument that fought back. His daughter, now stronger than she'd been in years, had started leading songwriting workshops for teens dealing with chronic illness. "Music doesn't cure everything," she told a group one afternoon, "but it gives you a place to put the pain so it doesn't live inside you all the time." Her words spread. Soon, hospitals began inviting her to run sessions in pediatric wings. She never called it therapy. She called it talking without words. Meanwhile, Julian changed too, not in flashy ways, but in the quiet shifts that matter most. He still ran his company, but he'd stepped back from the endless cycle of launches and headlines. He spent more time in the community centers than in boardrooms. He learned to play a few chords on the piano, not well, but enough to understand the struggle, the joy, the vulnerability of making sound from silence. He also started saying no more. No to deals that didn't align with his values. No to events that felt hollow. And yes, to real connection, to long conversations, to showing up even when no one was watching. One evening, after a particularly moving session at the Harlem Center, Julian found the man sitting alone on the steps outside, watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and purple. "You ever miss the quiet?" Julian asked, sitting beside him. The man thought for a moment. Not the kind that comes from being unseen, but the quiet inside, that's still there. It's just shared now, Julian nodded. I used to think silence meant emptiness. Now I know it's just space, waiting to be filled with something real. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the city humming around them. Later that week, a documentary crew came to film at the flagship center. They wanted to tell the story of the janitor who stunned a billionaire. But when they asked the man for an interview, he declined. I'm not the story, he said gently. The kids are. The music is. What happened between me and Julian? That was just the spark. The fire's in all of them. The crew didn't get their headline, but they got something better. Footage of a boy with a stutter finding his rhythm on the drums, a grandmother learning piano at 73, a group of teens recording a song about losing a friend and turning grief into something beautiful. When the documentary aired, it didn't go viral in the usual way. No memes, no celebrity endorsements, but schools started showing it. Community centers used it as a teaching tool, and every time it played, someone somewhere picked up an instrument for the first time. Back at Carnegie Hall, the man's final encore wasn't a flashy piece. It was a simple lullaby, something he used to hum to his daughter when she was small and scared of the dark. He played it slowly, tenderly, like a promise kept. After the last note faded, he stood, bowed once, and walked off stage without looking back. Outside, the city buzzed as usual. Taxis honking, people rushing, life moving fast. But inside that hall, something had shifted. Not just for the audience, but for everyone who'd been part of the journey. Julian didn't throw a party that night. He went home, made a cup of tea, and sat by the window replaying the concert in his mind. On his desk sat a framed photo, not of himself at an award ceremony, but of the man teaching a group of kids, hands mid-gesture, eyes alight with purpose. He picked up his phone and sent a single text. "Thank you for reminding me what matters." The reply came quickly. "Thank you for finally listening." Months later, at the opening of the 13th Community Center, this one in a neighborhood that hadn't had a music program in 20 years, a little girl no older than 7 sat at the grand piano in the center of the room. She'd never played before. Her fingers hovered nervously over the keys. The man knelt beside her. "Don't worry about being perfect," he said softly. "Just play what you feel." She took a breath, pressed a key, then another. The notes were clumsy, uneven, but full of heart. From the back of the room, Julian watched, smiling. He didn't need to say a word. The music said it all. The story never became a fairy tale. There was no wedding, no sudden riches that erased all struggle. Life still had its hard days, bills, setbacks, moments of doubt. But something fundamental had changed. People had learned to see each other, not for what they wore, what they owned, or what title they held, but for the music they carried inside. And sometimes, that's enough. The billionaire didn't marry the janitor. But in the end, they built something far more lasting, a world where every voice, no matter how quiet, gets a chance to be heard.